You know, it's so funny. I had originally planned to make a review on this movie about a year ago after Alien Romulus came out. In fact, I actually wanted to make this movie my second review. Unfortunately, however, by the time I actually started making videos, Alien Romulus had already been out for a few weeks, so I felt like I kind of missed my opportunity to talk about this movie. Of course, Alien Romulus ended up being so successful that shortly thereafter they ended up announcing an Alien TV show. So, things just kind of work out, don't they? Hey everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor, and welcome to Underground Cinema. Now, this review is going to be a little special for me, because the day I'm recording this is actually the day before the 1-year anniversary of me uploading the first episode of Underground Cinema. So this week, in order to both celebrate the anniversary of my channel, as well as tie into the new Alien TV show, Alien Earth, I figured I would talk about the movie Alien 2, Sulla Terra, aka Alien 2 on Earth. Ain't that a coincidence? Alien Earth, Alien 2 on Earth. Man, nothing's original, I love it. Anyway, Alien 2 on Earth is a sci-fi horror movie. It was released in the year 1980, 1 year after Ridley Scott's Alien, and it was marketed as a sequel to Alien. Of course, anyone who's even vaguely familiar with the Alien franchise would know that the actual sequel to Alien is James Cameron's Aliens, which was released in 1986, 7 years after the original Alien. So with that in mind, you might say, okay, what the is Alien 2? Well, to put it in the bluntest terms possible, Alien 2 is a knockoff movie. You see, to give some context to this, in the late 1970s, 20th Century Fox kinda hit the jackpot, releasing two of the biggest sci-fi films of all time within a 2-year period. Those two sci-fi films being George Lucas's Star Wars and Ridley Scott's Alien. Like, it truly cannot be overstated exactly how successful these two films were. Of course, just like any other person suffering from success, you're going to have a line of wannabes riding your coattails to the bank. And that is what happened with these films. As following the release of both Star Wars and Alien, there was a litany of knockoff films that were released to capitalize on the success of them. I'm talking about movies like Laser Blast, Creature, The Man Who Saved the World, Leviathan, Battle Beyond the Stars, even Galaxy of Terror. Just a string of films that were made to capitalize on these two sci-fi titans. But despite the countless attempts, none of these films were really ever able to break through to the mainstream. And as a result, most of them have been forgotten. However, unlike all the other knockoffs that were made, Alien 2 on Earth stands out as especially egregious, not only because some of the plot and world details are vaguely similar to Alien, but also because they put the word alien in the title of the movie. Like, they very deliberately knew what they were doing. Like, this was just purely a marketing move on their part. And the blatant choice of title is just so incredibly bold, and really just reminds me a lot of Troll 2. Because, of course, as anyone who's seen Troll from 1986 and Troll 2 could tell you, Troll 2 is not actually a sequel to Troll. I mean, Troll 2 wasn't even about trolls, it was about goblins. But because the original Troll was a mildly successful fantasy film, as well as maybe the direct inspiration of Harry Potter, I'm looking at you, J.K. Rowling. I know what you did. I know what you did with Troll. The filmmakers behind Troll 2 thought that they could then get away with blatant plagiarism, just like J.K. Rowling. Of course, unlike the Italian producers behind Troll 2 who got away with making an unauthorized sequel, the Italian producers behind Alien 2 did not, as shortly after this film's release, the writer, director, and producer of this movie, Ciro Ippolito, ended up getting sued by 20th Century Fox. Because obviously 20th Century Fox believed that they had a legitimate tort, considering that their intellectual trademark was apparently being infringed upon. Of course, once the trial actually went to court, the judge ended up siding with Ippolito because Fox could not prove ownership of the word alien. Putting aside the fact that alien is just an incredibly generic term that you see everywhere, there was also a novel written in the 1930s titled Alien, and the court found that since this book existed prior to the movie being made, that Fox did not have exclusive ownership over the word alien. So while there was a little hiccup, Ippolito got away mostly scot-free. Oh, Italian plagiarists. Gotta love it. But in any case, after I found out about this film and the lawsuit surrounding this film years ago, it got me incredibly intrigued, because I am a fan of the Alien franchise, I've seen every movie, and considering that this film markets itself as a sequel to that original film, it just left me curious to see how the material would be tackled, especially since, up until now, we've never actually seen the alien on Earth. You know, unless, of course, you count the Alien vs. Predator movies, but... But still, it's an interesting novelty to consider, the idea of xenomorphs on Earth. Like, I'm not sure how many of you remember this, but, like, the original teaser for Alien 3 marketed itself as the aliens coming to Earth.
In 1992, we will discover on Earth, everyone can hear you scream.
And obviously they didn't end up doing that in the final film because I think the teaser was made before David Fincher even got on the project. But still, the point stands that this is an idea that people have been curious about ever since the original Alien came out. And even though this movie isn't a real sequel to Alien and there aren't actually xenomorphs in it, I was curious going in seeing how this premise would be executed. So with that all in mind, you might be asking yourself, what is Alien 2 on Earth about? Well, when Alien 2 begins, we open up with a lot of stock footage, which is just great. You know, just a solid staple of low-budget filmmaking, using stock footage in placement of actual storytelling. Really taking after the tendencies of Ed Wood in that decision. Of course, while I was incredibly skeptical about the use of stock footage, something interesting that's revealed as the film goes on, and it's revealed fairly quickly, is that the stock footage is actually in the narrative. Like, the movie opens up in a TV studio, and we see a bunch of producers behind the camera circulating stock footage while they're discussing the story of astronauts going into space. Which is actually kind of interesting. Like, the movie just sort of throws you a curveball up front. Because I thought going into it that, oh, this movie's going to be a cheap piece of garbage. But the movie actually subverted my expectations and then revealed, oh, no, this... like, the stock footage is actually being used in the narrative. That's clever. But moving on from the stock footage into the aforementioned TV studio, once we enter the studio, that's where we meet our main character, a woman named Thelma Joyce. And she is currently giving an interview on caves, because she's a cave expert. But during her interview, she has some sort of psychic episode that is not explicitly explained. But apparently she gets these episodes relatively often, because her character is a telepath? Which is a interesting world detail that they introduce and don't do too much with in the story. But following this psychic episode that Thelma has, her boyfriend Roy elects to help her get her mind off of things, and drives her to meet up with their friends at a bowling alley. And following their meetup, Thelma and her friends end up getting ready for a cave expedition that they've been planning. And right before they enter the caves, a character named Bert hands Thelma a mysterious blue rock that he found lying around. Oh, I wonder if that's foreshadowing for something. Also, as a side note, and I was astonished to find this out, but the character of Bert in this movie is played by Michel Sauvé, who directed Cemetery Man, one of my favorite zombie movies, which I've actually done a review for, funny enough. Like, seriously, I was genuinely shocked to see him. I I didn't realize he was in this movie until I started planning the review. And, he does pretty well. He's one of the only actors to give a genuinely good performance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anywho, the crew begin their cave expedition, and they start spelunking into the caves. And as they're exploring the caves, they begin to notice that that blue rock that they brought in starts pulsing, almost as if there's a heartbeat in it. And anyone who saw Alien a year before this movie came out would know what's going to happen next. As, unsurprisingly, the blue rock wasn't actually a rock, it was an egg. And out bursts, I don't know, a face sucker? It's not a face hugger, it's like a face sucker or face eater. Like, it's a thing that goes on your face, like a face hugger. But the difference with it is that when it impregnates you, it doesn't force an alien to burst from your chest, it forces an alien to burst from your face. Which is, I think that's actually more horrifying. So, points to you, movie. Anyway, after these aliens start attacking the crew in the caves, they obviously start to panic and they begin to look for a way out. But they're slowly getting picked off one by one. Of course, utilizing her psychic abilities, Thelma and her boyfriend Roy are eventually the only two who are actually able to escape from the caves. And as soon as they find their way out, they get to a car and drive away as fast as they can. At this point in the story, the characters are traumatized, but they believe that they're mostly safe at this point. However, upon driving past an abandoned police car, an abandoned roadside shop, and finally driving into the abandoned city of Los Angeles, Thelma and Roy come to the realization that something very strange is going on. You see, as it turns out, these blue egg rocks, as we see throughout the movie, have been littered everywhere. And it's semi-implied within the story that they were brought here by that astronaut ship that was referenced at the beginning of the film. Regardless of how they got here, though, it's very clear that the aliens have begun wiping out the human population. And upon going back to the bowling alley that we see earlier in the movie, Thelma and Roy get separated, and Roy ends up vanishing entirely, as Thelma discovers that he has been devoured by a giant alien creature that we never actually see the outer appearance of. We only see the alien's point of view. Thelma is eventually able to escape. However, as she runs into the street, she just yells for help from someone, anyone. But all there is silence, as we discover on Earth, no one can hear you scream. And yeah, that's the movie Alien 2. And, it's actually kind of okay. Like, seriously, I had exceptionally low expectations going into this movie because I knew it was a ripoff. Like, I knew it was a knockoff movie. But, I don't know. Like, I had a good time watching it. And I think it actually has a lot going for it. Like, from an aesthetic level, I think this film is great. I absolutely adore the cinematography and color grading. Like, the movie makes use of primarily natural light, and it also has a lot of very clear handheld camera motion. And normally the use of a handheld camera rig and natural light would scream cheap production, but in this movie it's actually kind of charming, and really adds to the aesthetic of the film. It makes the film feel a little more authentic. And also, that same level of authenticity is carried forward into the end of the film, when Thelma is being chased by the alien creature. Like I said, you never get an exterior shot of the creature. You just see its point of view. And in a scene like that, having the camera move around with handheld motion really adds to the sensation that this is a living creature that is chasing you, and that you should be frightened. And I also think that this is tied into how the film is overall executed, as the buildup of suspense in this film is surprisingly effective. I mean, they establish from the beginning that there's a threat from space, and early on in the film, we see that Thelma is bothering a woman and her daughter on the beach for some unknown reason related to the psychic vision that she had at the very beginning. And we actually get a hint of the alien threat in this scene before our crew begins spelunking, as this same mother goes searching on the beach for her daughter, only to discover that her daughter's face is missing. And these subtle allusions throughout the first act have massive payoffs once you actually get to the caves, as the cave scenes in this movie, which make up about half the film, are by far the best scenes in the film. Like, they're so artistically interesting, there are so many creative shots and use of light in these dark caves. And because caves are a naturally enclosed space, it gives that same claustrophobic feeling to the viewer as you would get watching the original Alien from 1979. Like, it really just is an incredibly genius horror setting, and I feel like a lot of filmmakers and horror fans are aware of this. I mean, that's probably the big reason why movies like The Descent are so popular. Because it just seems really intuitive how you could use a space like that as an effective setting for a horror scenario. And I feel like this film utilizes those settings pretty well. And because the caves are so dark, and because the lighting is so selective, it also helps to enhance the somewhat iffy practical effects that are in this movie. Like, just watching this movie, even if you are immersed in it, you can tell that all the blood and guts and gore is fake. But the caves enhance the setting and the narrative so much that it helps you to look past how fake they look. And they even help to highlight a couple select moments that really stand out to you. Like the moment where a guy's head falls off with his spine, or the head explosion that you see near the end of the movie. Like, both of those look pretty great. Like, you can tell that they're fake, but they look good because of the setting and the execution. And while on the subject of the film's execution, I'd also like to bring up how good the editing is in this movie, surprisingly. Like, there's a lot of smooth transitions between shots in this movie. Like, one that stuck out to me before they go into the caves is this one transition shot where a character is putting on his boot. And I just thought to myself, whoa, that's an impressive transition, I like that. And then there's actually when they descend into the caves. And the cave scenes, overall, have a ton of clever transitions between the various shots. But I think one of the best ones is once they actually go in completely, and it fades to black, and then the light comes back on when the character of Bert is lighting a candle next to his typewriter. Things like that in filmmaking, I just really appreciate. When you genuinely make an effort to integrate the editing into the narrative like that. Like, yes, technically speaking, editing is supposed to be invisible, you're not supposed to notice it, but it's just so artfully done, and I genuinely appreciate that. And pivoting back to the cinematography, there's scenes where the cinematographer is able to utilize the light in shots to create interesting effects. Like near the end of the film when Thelma is harnessing all of her psychic powers, and you can see a lens flare covering her eyes. Like, you can tell that that was done deliberately. But it's still an impressive in-camera effect that allows you to visually convey what's going on in the scene. Which should be your priority when you're making a movie. Making sure that the visuals do the heavy lifting in the storytelling. And I'll get back to that in a bit. But yeah, that's really all I have to say about the editing and cinematography. Another aesthetic element of the film that I think really works, however, is the soundtrack. Like, the score in this film is amazing. Like, there's a lot of heavy synth, a little bit of electric guitar giving a soft rock and roll vibe. Like, you can argue that's not necessarily appropriate given the horror tone that this film is aiming for, but it just sounds so good. And especially when they're entering the caves, it's oddly appropriate, and just makes the descending scenes feel more epic. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed the aesthetic of this film, and thought it was mostly effective as a horror film. That being said, some significant drawbacks that this film does have is in regards to both the pacing and the acting, kind of. You see, when it comes to the pacing of this film, it's kind of all over the place. Like, the first 20 to 30 minutes of this movie is just so incredibly meandering. Like, it just feels like the characters are wandering around, not really doing anything relevant to the story. And like I said, there are seeds planted from the beginning to where the plot is going to go. But there's so many just drawn-out sequences in the first third of this movie. Like, one that really stuck out to me near the beginning, it's after Thelma gets her vision at the TV station. She has her boyfriend drive her to a shoreline, and then she waves to a friend of hers on a boat, and then we get like a full 1, maybe 2 minute shot of the guy rowing over in his boat in real time. Like, it just drags so much, and it's so unbelievably boring. And it's scenes like that that made me want to turn the movie off before it actually got going. But then when you actually get to the cave scenes, despite the fact that you spend over 40 minutes in the caves, those scenes just blow by. Like, seriously, as soon as they get into the caves in this movie, you're locked in, as you're just incredibly interested in them wandering around. And the cave scenes are just so full of fear and disorientation that you end up feeling as lost as the characters do, but in a good way. Like, the characters in the caves are just incredibly disorientated. In fact, there's even a fake jump scare in this movie where one of the characters is just wandering around this area where an alien just attacked them, and then he freaks out because a girl taps him on the shoulder. Like, little moments like that really contribute to the cave scenes and help the scenes blow by as there's always something happening. But then once Thelma and Roy get out of the caves and things begin to slow down a bit, going into the climax, it feels a bit disjointed. Like, the movie starts off just so unbelievably slow, and then it just picks up for over half of its runtime, and then it slows back down, and then speeds up again. And yes, technically speaking, that is also the pacing of the original Alien movie. Like, it starts off as deliberately slow, but then the pacing ramps up as soon as Kane has the alien burst out of his chest. At that point, it's just a race to escape as you're trying not to get killed by the xenomorph. But with Alien, Ridley Scott was able to invest the viewer immediately into the film's tone as soon as it opened. Just having all of these eerie establishing shots of the interior of the Nostromo, paired with Jerry Goldsmith's amazing score, as you're eventually introduced to the crew as they're coming out of hypersleep. Like, all of that is done deliberately to invest you in the tone of the movie. Meanwhile, in this movie, while it does have a similar pattern in terms of its pacing, it's missing that key element of investing you in the tone from the beginning. Because, as mentioned, going into this movie, I expected it to be trash since it opens up with stock footage. And while they do eventually reveal that the stock footage in the movie actually exists within the narrative, and I felt like that was a clever comedic beat, it also doesn't really work to establish the tone of this horror movie. Essentially, what I'm saying here is that the movie is missing a hook. Obviously, with any horror film, you need to slowly build suspense over time in order to actually get a reaction from the viewer. But you also do need to earn the audience's attention from the beginning. And admittedly, this can be a pretty hard thing to do. Which is why there's just so many horror movies that exist that put a random monster attack at the beginning just to get the audience invested before things slow down and they build back up. This movie does not have that, though. And I feel like it's the worse for it, because since there is no cold open to get you invested, and it fails to invest you in the tone, you're basically just relying on the goodwill of the viewer to sell the film. And I do think that that is a distinct storytelling error that probably could have easily been remedied if you didn't open the movie with stupid stock footage. I don't know. I both love and hate the inclusion of stock footage in this movie. I think it's funny, but also it fails to do anything with the tone of the movie. But yeah, the pacing and hook were a distinct issue in the movie, but something that really just kills this film for me is how terrible the dubbing is. Like, the dubbing is just so bad in this movie. In both the Italian version
Mentre l'interesse di tutti è rivolto a ciò che avviene al di sopra delle nostre teste.
and the English version.
The outer reaches of our solar system, but perhaps what most of you don't know.
Now, to be fair, this was an Italian production, and it was not uncommon for Italian productions at the time to have a dub put over the film after the initial shoot, because it would often be the case in Italian international productions that a lot of the cast and crew would be multilingual. I mean, this exact thing was actually done with Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name trilogy. You know, Fistful of Dollars, Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. All three of those films were Italian productions directed by the Italian filmmaker Sergio Leone. And with those films, a lot of the cast and crew were multilingual. But Leone got around that by shooting the films basically as silent movies, and then adding the dubbed-in dialogue after the fact. And to be fair, while I'm not personally a fan of the dubbing in the Man with No Name trilogy, I can't deny how effectively done it is, because it was an intentional artistic choice from the film's director. He deliberately shot those movies to be as visually compelling and narratively coherent as they possibly could, cinematically. And then he just added the dialogue later to elevate the pre-existing material. And on top of all that, he also made sure that the actors actually put the emotion into the line reads when they were dubbing the movie. With Alien 2 on Earth, however, the dubbing almost entirely across the board just sounds terrible. Like, so much of the voice delivery is just so stale. And when I say stale, I'm not saying that the actors aren't putting emotion into the line reads. What I'm saying is that the emotion isn't coming through the performance. It doesn't sound natural, the line reads that they're giving in the voice dub. The only two actors who sound relatively normal amongst the bunch would be Belinda Main, who obviously plays Thelma in this movie, and Michelle Sauvé, who plays Bert. Those two sound pretty good. Everyone else just sounds okay to bad. And because these voice lines are so bad, it also makes it difficult to actually gauge the proper physical performances of the actors in the film. Because as far as I can tell, the body language acting amongst the actors is pretty good, for the most part. But because I'm so distracted by the terrible dub, I can't really fully appreciate that and gauge the individual performances properly. And you know what, to be fair, maybe I should have rewatched this movie on mute, but I'm also not convinced that this movie would have told its story any more effectively without the dialogue. I mean, it kind of barely effectively tells its story with the dialogue. Like, yes, the aesthetic and the visuals in this film do a lot of the heavy lifting, but so many other story elements of the film, like the astronaut plotline, for instance, just feel like afterthoughts, and just put in as an excuse to explain why the alien eggs are on Earth to begin with. And while we're on the subject of the narrative, while I did mostly enjoy this film, there was one final thing that just didn't rub me the right way, and that was the ending. You see, in theory, I should love the ending of this film. You have the final girl escape from all the monsters and finally manage to get to safety. But, to her surprise, there is no safety, because apparently everyone on Earth has been devoured. At least that's what you can assume. Like, in theory, I should like that ending. Not only because it's incredibly bold, but because it makes sense narratively and it's thematically appropriate. We've seen these blue rock eggs throughout the film. We can assume that they're everywhere. So the fact that everyone is gone at the end, even though it's shocking, it doesn't feel necessarily unexpected. It's technically an appropriate ending to this narrative, but it just feels so incredibly anticlimactic, the way it's executed. And I'll be completely honest, this is one of those times where I can't explain why I feel like this. Like, I'm sure while I'm editing, or maybe even months down the line, I'll think about it more and figure out why this ending doesn't work for me. But just sitting there watching it, I think to myself, this doesn't feel as impactful as it should. Like, the main character just yelling into the abyss, wanting someone to call back to her, but no one does. I feel like that should be more affecting than it is, but it's not. And it's weird, considering how much of the film I actually enjoyed, that didn't work for me. And I wish I could explain why. I really wish I could. But I don't know what to tell you. Still, regardless of my complaints, and regardless of how I feel about the ending, I do oddly enjoy Alien 2 on Earth. Like, it has significant issues, which I've brought up, but the aesthetic of this film just really works for me. And I do feel like it's mostly executed well as a horror movie. And this is coming from someone who's generally not a fan of Italian cinema. Like, I don't enjoy most of the Italian films that I've seen. But, this one was a fun time. I enjoyed watching it, even though it was a very deliberate knockoff of a better movie. So if you're a fan of the Alien franchise, or Alien-type movies, go check out Alien 2 on Earth. Maybe you'll enjoy it like I did. Or maybe you'll think it's garbage like everyone else on the internet. No matter what, the cave scenes are cool. Like, I can say that with an absolute certainty. The cave scenes are really cool in this movie, and they look really good. So, there's that. But in any case, that was my review of Alien 2 on Earth. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on Letterboxd or Instagram if you want to hear more of my film takes. I'm going to do my best to pry myself out of this skin-tight Nomex flight suit, which I have not worn in 5 years, and I'm realizing I should not have worn for this review. And I will see you later.